Welcome and good evening. This is the July General Meeting for ORD2 Indivisible. My name is Terry Martin and I'm on the ORD2 Steering Committee. I am also a candidate for Jackson County Commissioner, just to be clear, and I hope I learn a lot tonight along with the rest of you. This meeting is part of a series that ORD2 began in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis. In June, we used our meeting to give voice to a panel of 6 local people of color who talked about how they have experienced racism in the Rogue Valley and how we can be better allies. Ashland Police Lieutenant Hector Melitic was in our last meeting, and he suggested that we extend that discussion by talking to local law enforcement leaders. So tonight, they have the stage, and we're going to learn about how they approach local policing. Next month, we'll go further and talk with representatives of Cahoots and other programs that have successfully reimagined policing. This is an ongoing discussion. We are happy to host it, and it is open to all, and we're delighted to see so many guests who are not active in ORD2 Indivisible. Of course, we've heard criticism about the format for our meeting tonight. Thank you. We always appreciate feedback. We're learning as we go. We hope that you learn new things from this discussion tonight as well. Please remember, these 90 minutes or so are a small piece of the puzzle. There are many voices out there that need to be heard, and we know that. We envision these forums as an opportunity to listen and learn from people who have different perspectives in our community's issues, and we will do the best we can to provide a place for these voices as we go forward. 2 weeks ago, we asked for questions from members of our organization for tonight's forum. We got over 100 responses, and our writing team sifted through the best of them to create a list of 10 issues that people want to hear about tonight. That list was provided to the panel and to our moderator, and it is our hope that they will be covered in tonight's discussion. But this is a live discussion, and it's going to go where it's going to go. So you're welcome to post follow-up questions, concerns, thoughts at any time in the chat box. We'll be watching for that. I'd like to stress that this is not a softball game. Expect some hard questions, and go ahead and post hard questions in the chat box. But please, when you do, be civil and respectful. Also remember that these 4 officials graciously accepted our invitation to be part of this discussion. They want to have this conversation with you. Remember, they are also our friends and our neighbors, and unlike most of us, they are lifelong public servants. They have stepped up and devoted their lives to try and make our communities safer. So tonight is an opportunity for all of us to get to know these people better and to find out how we can work together to make Jackson County a better place for all of us. It's our hope that these officials will return for our next month's meeting, where we'll talk about reimagining policing, and it will be their turn to listen and learn about what policing could look like in the future. We hope that you tonight will listen and learn as well, with an open mind, please, and an open heart. With that, I'd like to introduce tonight's moderator, State Senator Jeff Golden. Jeff and I have been friends for over 30 years, since he worked at Southern Oregon Public Television and I was a reporter at the Mail Tribune. He recently sat through the legislature's special session on policing, and we thought he'd be the perfect person to handle tonight's discussion. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Terry. Thanks for the invitation. We have until about 8 o'clock tonight, trying to stay pretty close to that, and a lot of ground to cover. So I want to get right to it. I want to start by introducing our 4 panelists. They are Jackson County Sheriff Nathan Sickler. Raise your hand for those who can see you. Thank you. Medford Chief of Police Scott Claussen. Hello, Scott. Central Point Chief of Police Christine Allison. Christine. And Ashland Chief of Police Ty O'Mara. Ty. Thank you all. I'm betting you've had long days. Thank you all for adding another hour and a half to it. And I just want to make one very quick comment sort of on the heels of what Terry said, that this is a long and comprehensive conversation, of which this is one piece, because I got a couple of expressions of concern from people over the weekend about the composition of this panel. And, the notion that this is a completely representative panel that has all the important points of view on law enforcement would be misguided. And I think everybody agrees with that. We're not covering all perspectives. I just want to say personally, I think it's really valuable to have the 4 actually leading law enforcement officers in my district in the Rogue Valley together for a conversation about how the system works and their perspective on it. And as one piece of multiple discussions, I really see a lot of value, and I'm glad it's happening tonight. So once again, thank you to the panelists. I'd like to go around the table quickly. Everybody okay with a first name basis tonight? Good, thank you. I'd like to go around the panel quickly and sort of ask an introductory question. What's your agency? How long have you been there? And why did you choose law enforcement for your career? Why are you in law enforcement? Who'd be willing to kick that off? Scott, you happen to be at the top of my screen. Would you go first?
Yeah, happy to go first. Yeah, so I'm a Rogue Valley native, spent my entire life here, raised my family here, and attended Southern Oregon University where I got my degree. And I've been with Medford Police for 25 years. So it's been a great career, and I've been the chief now for 1 year. And I studied psychology at Southern Oregon University, and I knew that in some way I wanted to help people. I wasn't entirely sure when I went into my degree program. And law enforcement became an avenue for me to be able to help people. And so that's why I got into law enforcement, and it's served me well, and I enjoy it very much.
Nate Sickler, would you take it from there?
Sure. I moved to the Rogue Valley in 1995 to attend SOU. I majored in criminology there. And in 1998, as part of my education, I needed to do a practicum for my degree, and got a job as a reserve or volunteer police officer with the city of Phoenix, and have been doing that ever since. I got hired full-time in 1999, and have been working in law enforcement for the past 22.5 years. I've been the sheriff for almost 4 years, and I'm raising my family here in the Valley. And I got into law enforcement because, at the time, there's a lot of reasons. One, I thought I could make a difference in my community, but I would say equally as drawing to this career for me was just kind of the allure at the time. I thought it would be an exciting job. I thought that there would be some opportunities there for me to do things that I thought were interesting, investigating crimes, responding to calls and that sort of thing. So that's what drew me in, and I've been here ever since, and it's been a good career for me.
Thanks. Chris Allen of Central Point, please. Allison, pardon me.
Hello, everyone. I have been born and raised here in Central Point in the Valley. I have been in law enforcement. I'm coming up on 26 years, maybe even a little bit longer. I started when I was 18 in a cadet program. I am an alum of SOU, and I have my master's degree from Boston University. And I've been the chief in Central Point since 2012. So I've been there, sometimes been with Central Point for coming up on 23 years. Interesting for me, a different path of why I wanted to be a police officer. I had individuals in my family who were victims of crime, and it meant a lot to me to advocate for them and to see the process through. There was also a different dynamic for me at that time, 26 years ago. There was a lot of barriers for myself to be a police officer, and I was stubborn enough to say, I want to do this and I can do this, instead of going down the road of being an attorney. So it has been a really good career, and I have enjoyed my tenure in Central Point.
Thank you. And Tayo Mira of Ashland.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks for the invitation to join everybody tonight. My name's Tayo Mira. I've been a police officer for a little bit over 28 years. I've been in Ashland for 10 years, chief for 5 years. I came here from Detroit, Michigan, which is where I grew up. Went to Hillsdale College for a BA in psychology, like Scott Claussen, and went on to get a master's degree from Southern Oregon University after I got out here. So what Chris Allison just said resonates with me. Growing up in Detroit, not the suburbs, but inside the city of Detroit. Everybody, including me and my family, was victimized by crime. And it was a constant waiting game for the next victimization to occur. And I remember when I was growing up that when I saw a Detroit police car, that gave me a few minutes of feeling safe. So that combined with some really positive role models I had that were Detroit police officers in various capacities since I was about 15, law enforcement, that's it. Generally didn't deviate from that. As soon as I got out of college in 1992, the academy, and then got my career started. I'm very glad to be here with you tonight and here in Ashland in general.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, all four of you again, for participating. So as Terry mentioned, there were about 100 questions submitted in advance, and they've kind of been consolidated in a certain kind of way. And I'm going to ask the first one and ask each of you to respond. And there are kind of three sub-questions in this question that kind of go to measurements or metrics or experience. And I think you've all got the questions, and I'll remind you of the sub-questions as we go. But the question is, do you think we have racial problems in policing in Jackson County? And I'll just read the three questions under this heading. And if you can attempt to touch on them in your response, that would be great. First is, how many traffic violations has your department issued to people of color in the last year? Second, do officers have a financial quota that they're expected to meet through issuing citations? Third is, have you disciplined officers for race-related behavior? Do you see these as unique actions, or are they symptoms of deeper systemic issues? If you have those written or know what I'm talking about, go ahead and answer that pretty completely, or briefly and completely when it's your turn. Who would start, please? You've got my illuminated box right now, Ty. Would you take a first shot at that set of questions?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the big ones. There is systemic racism in the United States. There's racism in Oregon. Oregon has a very troubling history with racism embedded in the Constitution. And there's systemic racism in Jackson County. We have to remember that our law enforcement officers are pulled from the community. And so, is there racism in policing? It's impossible to say, because I, as a police chief, I don't know what's in my officer's head, and I don't know what happens with my officers when they go home. I know the scrutiny that I give them both before and after they get hired. I know the scrutiny that I and the rest of the team give them as they go about their daily routines. And I am confident that there is not manifested racism in the Ashland Police Department or Medford, Central Point, or the Sheriff's Department. But it's kind of a impossible question to answer, because our police officers do come from our national community. And anybody who says that there's not a cultural problem with racism, I think has hit his, her, or their head in the sand. So that's my answer to that. There are no quotas for anything in the city, for the City of Ashland Police Department. I'm going to take the liberty of saying that it's the same for every police department around here. There's no financial incentive to give tickets to people in the City of Ashland. The Ashland Municipal Court is subsidized by the city. It is not a money maker. It is a financial encumbrance on the city. It is kept going as a convenience for people, so they don't have to go up to Central Point or Medford to take care of their matters. And so for Ashland, there's no financial incentive. I have not had any disciplinary matters arise out of race. I continue to take ownership of the arrest of Mr. El Shalom back in November of 2018, a young black man that had no business having handcuffs put on him, let alone seeing the inside of a patrol car or the inside of the county jail. I take responsibility for that 100%. And we can speculate all day long about whether or not there was implicit bias knocking around in the back of the involved officers' heads, and that is worthwhile speculation, but in the end, it's speculation. I believe, as I've constantly said for almost the last 2 years, that I think it was really, really shoddy police work, but not racially motivated. Um, that did result in discipline, not for race relations issues, but for failure to adhere to policies. And other than saying that one sergeant got demoted to officer, I would, respect the officer's privacy on the rest of what the discipline entailed. So thank you.
Let me press you 1 second, Ty, on that, because
Yeah.
I think it speaks to something people wonder a lot about. What was the basis for your determination that it wasn't a racial incident?
There is simply no evidence that it was. The officer was dispatched to a business near 7-Eleven in Ashland and was told that the person was described as a young black male wearing a dark colored hoodie, left in such a direction in such a time frame. And an officer found, unfortunately, Mr. El Shalom matching that very, very vague description. And they proceeded to detain him, which was a legitimate detention, but they did not conduct the follow-up steps of going back and looking at the video. It was a marijuana dispensary at which this happened. By law, every marijuana dispensary has to have security cameras in it, and they just neglected to do any follow-up. So it's a fair question, Jeff. I don't have any evidence. There's no evidence that it was racially motivated. There's no evidence that it wasn't racially motivated. But barring the presence of that indictment, that suggestion, I think we have to look at the scrutiny that these officers have received, again, both pre and post hiring, the training that they continue to receive with implicit bias, procedural justice and whatnot, and say that there's no reason to believe that it was racially motivated. But again,
it was based out after a extensive conversation with the officer, between you and the officer.
Yeah. Of course, there was. Sorry, I'm not doing that justice. There was a huge investigation surrounding this, interviews with lots of different people. There simply just was no indication other than speculation. And so given the lack of a real indictment in that direction, I think that it's unfair to come to that conclusion.
Okay. Nate Sickler, would you take on that main question? Do we have racial problems in policing in Jackson County? You're the one who has all of Jackson County in your jurisdiction, and as many of those sub-questions as you'd like.
Yeah, so as far as, is there evidence of racism present in policing in Jackson County? I have been thinking about this question since we were given these a few days ago. And I don't see where racism is manifested in the way that police officers or deputies treat individuals in Jackson County. We don't have, evidence that people are treating others differently because of the color of their skin or their religion or their creed. And obviously I have to be aware that I'm not going to see everything, but we do, as Ty started to talk about, we do pre-employment background checks. And in today's world, that when people do things, say things, post things on social media, create things, that those things are found and often brought up, well into the future. And background investigators look for those things, indicators of predispositions to racism or racist actions, bigotry, biases. And, we then go through a, psychological exam for those that we hire. And, I just, in today's policing, I just don't see racism as being a part of what we do here in the county and with our fellow law enforcement agencies.
Do you have any data on traffic violations by race, or citations, I should say?
Citations, no. We we are part of the STOP program, as you may know, Jeff, from being part of the legislative group in Salem, that there was a STOP program was put into law a few years ago. I don't remember the exact year, but it's been a tiered program, meaning larger agencies started a few years ago. We started last year. And so we're able to capture data. So when officers make contacts with individuals in the community, whether it's a traffic stop or a bicycle stop, or they talk to an individual who's walking down the road, they have to enter data regarding that contact. And so we are able to look at those numbers. Now, whether or not a citation is issued, that's a deeper mine of data that we didn't have time to look into before this event and when we got the questions, because it's going to be a pretty extensive record search to look at all of those tickets or citations, and then try to look at race on top of that. So it's certainly something that you know, I'm not opposed to doing. There's just no way to have done it before this panel to answer that question thoroughly. But you know, when we look at just stops in general, I think for us, I think about 82% of everyone we stop is white. So you know, I don't know if it's perfect with our demographics, but it's fairly consistent with our demographics in Jackson County.
Is race routinely a line on any report form that your officers use, whether it's a traffic stop or anything else? Is race recorded?
Yeah, there's generally speaking, there's a box that you check, whether it's, you know, W and H, B, and then there's some other, obviously, you know, different ethnic groups that you could list. But yes, it is captured on all of our police reports. It's captured within our citations that are issued, and then again within the stop data. So where there's not a citation issued or not a police report written, it should be recorded through that stop data, that stop program.
Have you disciplined officers for race-related behavior, or have you been around that kind of discipline?
We have not had anybody in my tenure disciplined for that. And I was trying to think if we've even had a complaint that has substantiated as a racial motivated complaint. And in 2019, we actually have to report that information. And in 2019, we didn't have any complaints that were based on race.
Okay. Chris in Central Point, would you take a turn at the issue of racial problems in policing in our area?
So you know, I think that it's a very interesting concept, and I don't want to mirror what everyone else has said. Definitely, I think that the systematic racism in law enforcement is prevalent on the undertones. I know speaking with some counterparts in different pieces or parts of the country, we see something very different throughout the country. Why the Pacific Northwest is different on some scale in Jackson County, I'm not sure. But I think that I'm gonna quote Chief, who is on the panel today, is I don't think as individuals, anyone is immune from it. If there's that potential. But what I do know is how we hire and what we look for in Central Point. And this is what I have said, and I continue to talk about. When I hire a police officer, it is a very important commitment to the community. And I can teach someone to be a police officer. I cannot teach them to be a good person. So those are the things that I look for in my interviews. And I think that that has been very beneficial to our department, and I have seen it come to fruition on the caliber of officers that we have in Central Point and in the Valley. I think that that's something that you have to start with. I kind of wanted to go back to some of the questions on violations about it being a quota system. At least in Central Point, Jackson County, what I can say is that very little income comes from our traffic citations. And there's a lot of benefit from that, because in those contacts with citizens, we're able to educate, we're able to make contacts. Sometimes that's the very first interaction with a police officer. So we don't have that type of a relationship with our community where it's a financial basis. And I think we've seen that to be very detrimental to a community. So that's something in Jackson County and especially in Central Point, we have really distanced ourselves from long even before 2015 when you saw it become a report listing in some of the after action reports. So you know, that
Chris,
those are
I'd like
kind
to
of the
follow
things
up.
that I wanted to point on.
I'd like to follow up for a second and ask you a question about interviewing. You mentioned interviewing and how important it is. I'm thinking there are probably people listening on this call who are trying to imagine the interview process. And I doubt you get many applicants who sit across from you and make a shockingly racist overt remark that happens.
No.
And I think everybody knows on this call that racism is generally a subtler matter than that. So my question is, with your experience, all of you are seasoned and have been administrators for quite a while, and any of the rest of you can jump in on this. What can tell you, what have you learned about what to look for in an interview? You know, if you're not going to get a smoking gun, horrible comment, what are you listening for? What do you look for when you talk to somebody to get at that deeper, maybe less than fully conscious racism?
So what I can say is that while there's not going to be those overt signs of that, I have actually had interviews where it has led me to believe that someone is going to be less than forthcoming in the interview, where there is some subtlety. Maybe I get a little bit more of that in an interview, but I really have been able to see in some individuals. But we only have, at least for my interview, usually 30 to 45 minutes. And again, I think, Jeff, you're spot on, is I'm not going to know everyone for 30 to 45 minutes. So that's why I really depend on that background investigation and that psychological evaluation.
How extensive is that psychological evaluation before they come and interview with you?
So we use a doctor up in Lake Oswego, and he is nationally known. And looking at his statistics and the data that he brings forward, he does, he gives us a lot of those indicators, the tests, the different modules, the battery of tests that you're seeing, and then what he delivers to us. It gives us a good insight of what someone is looking at. And I know dealing with Dr. Corey and his associates, that is something he's looking for, and it would come back on his evaluation.
And last question, do you have any experience with race-related discipline of officers?
So again, same type of a, answer that I'm going to give. I have gone back to 2007 and looked for complaints, and I don't have any in our department. I don't want to be naive though and think that those may not have been out there, because I think we also know that if someone's experiencing that, they may not come forward. But what I can say is that I haven't seen it in any complaints of racial profiling in Central Point. And, I want to make sure that we're really looking for that as we move forward.
Great. Scott in Medford, your turn on this general area of racial problems in policing in Jackson County.
Right, and I'm just going to pile on, Jeff, to a comment that Sheriff Sickler made, because we were talking about the STOP app, which is the Statistical Transparency of Policing data that we started, and that was a House bill that came out in 2017. And I'm going to actually throw some numbers at you, because we were one of the first agencies. We were considered a tier 1 agency based upon our size. And so the first year data for the whole state of Oregon that shows that of 97.2% of contacts, both traffic and person contacts, In the state of Oregon, 77.4 were white, 5.1% were black, and 12.1% were Hispanics. That's all online. That's the Criminal Justice Commission who is administering that program that we have to report that data to. And there are, as the sheriff mentioned, there are several categories of race. I think there's 7 in all. So with regard to the quotas, we do not have a quota. There's no financial gain for us or for the police department at all. In fact, most of our policing now is call driven, so we don't even do a lot of enforcement anymore. Our traffic teams, which are the motor cops that we've traditionally had, do a lot of citations, spend the majority of their time going from call to call and to traffic crashes. So there's not a lot of traffic enforcement that occurs in Medford. And then I'll just touch on too, I agree wholeheartedly with the other panelists about we have to hire the right people. And we're not going to see it necessarily every time in an interview in and of itself or by itself. It has to come from good psychological testing. We have to find people who are committed to helping people and working with our community. And I really don't think you see that until maybe 18 months and even 5 years down the road. So Medford has a very long probationary period. We can terminate our employees up to 18 months. So we have a long time to look at their work and to train them and coach them. And then after that, my mantra all along has been we have to hold our people accountable. Right now we are looking at the stats. Going back to 2018, 44% of our complaints on our officers came internal. So that's a statistic that I like. The years afterwards were about a third of those complaints that were investigated came internally. So what I'm trying to say is that we do hold each other accountable. Some of those were peer complaints, some of those were supervisor complaints, but we do take those issues seriously and investigate them.
Okay, good. I'm going to move on to another section again that consolidates a lot of questions. The Black Lives Matter movement is asking for direct change. How does your department stand on these demands? There's a list of 5 sort of policy areas. I think just for clarity, I'll go through them and ask each of the 4 of you to comment on one before I go on to the next. Military equipment. Does your department have it? If so, why and what kinds? And I think I'm going to start with Ty, because we got a question tonight that relates to this from someone watching. Why does the Ashland Police Department, why have they been seen wearing body armor downtown with multiple weapons? Can they operate without the equipment? What amount of budget is spent on military equipment? So really the general question is about changes. This is a specific question directed to Ashland, Ty, but the general question is, should there be, and what kind of restrictions on military equipment for policing? Ty, would you go first?
Yeah, of course. In some regards, I'm not on the hot seat with this because Ashland is small enough and we don't have the big incidents like Medford and County do, where there is a legitimate need for those armored personnel carriers and whatnot. So I've kind of gotten easy out. We don't use military equipment here. We have patrol rifles, of course, and shotguns that have beanbag rounds in them. But the stuff that I think is really getting at that question, I think it's called the 1033 program. That's nothing that we've ever had anything to do with, as far as I know. Certainly not under my tenure as being the police chief. The question about officers wearing what's called outer vests is a really good question, and I'm glad that it came up. I resisted outer vests There can be various reasons for outer vests, which is literally your body armor panels are, instead of being worn underneath your uniform shirt, like has been the case for decades, and a lot of us, including me, still do it that way. An outer vest is that your ballistic panels are worn in an exterior carrier. It does look more militaristic because depending on how it gets done, it can look like every police officer in a department is getting ready to go on a SWAT raid. Not the message that we want to convey. However, there's varying ways that this can be done. I was very, very hesitant to allow outer vests because I don't want our officers looking militarized. Eventually, the legitimate physiological medical reasons, they keep piling on. I've been a police officer for 28 years. I've worn a 30-pound gun belt on my hip for 28 years. Although when I started out, it was really just a revolver and some handcuffs. It wasn't all this other stuff. That takes a toll on your body. Some people can sustain it more than others, but there are other people that develop legitimate physiological problems from carrying a significant amount of weight around on their hips for a long time. So the outer vest is one way to address that. It puts that weight on your shoulders instead of on your hips. Now, I get it. That's a fine line between giving the officers the equipment they need to navigate their careers safely and also not looking like, a bunch of commandos and whatnot. My way of doing it was finding the vest that looks as closely like a uniform shirt as possible. And I have mandated that weapons may not be worn up on the vest. Weapons, the handgun, the conducted energy weapon, the taser, the pepper spray, the extra ammunition clips, all that stuff has to remain on your gun belt. But the radio, a tourniquet, your handcuffs, that stuff that is not offensive can go up top and lighten that load a little bit. So great question. I did the best I could in navigating that. And so that's why you see people with outer vests on walking around Ashland. That's the best we can do, respecting their physiology and respecting the wants of the community.
Ty, when you started, you said Ashland is smaller than places where an armored personnel carrier might be justified. Generally speaking, when do you think an armored personnel carrier would be justified in policing?
Well, it's a rescue vehicle, and I'm stepping into the sheriff and Chief Claussen's area here, but it's a rescue vehicle. If somebody is trapped in a hostile situation, the armored personnel carrier can get resources to that person, can get officers close to a threat without endangering the officers. I think the sheriff has an accounting of his armored personnel carrier being deployed in a long driveway, and the only way that his team could save people while the armored personnel carrier was taking rounds was to use the armored personnel carrier to save members of the community. So I get that it seems like an extreme thing for relatively small communities and counties to have. I will support Sheriff Sickler and Chief Claussen all day long in their need to have that stuff, because it's the knee-jerk reaction is to say there's tanks rolling around in Jackson County. No, there's rescue vehicles rolling around in Jackson County, and those are tools that are needed. Again, I don't participate in the 1033 program. I don't know how their respective agencies got those, but they are legitimate tools needed for rescue operations.
Well, let me ask Nate to jump in at this point and speak to this into military equipment particularly. And I'd like to add to the question, there is at least a perception that military type equipment is used in part not to protect so much as to intimidate and to chill protest as a upfront sort of show of force. Is that a problem? Can it be a problem here or elsewhere? And Nate, let me invite you to speak to the area of military equipment and policing.
Sure. Since we're talking about vehicles right now, so we have two vehicles. One is a smaller kind of an armored personnel carrier, as Ty alluded to, and then we have a larger one that we did get as a result of the 1033 program. But I will tell you
What is
this.
the 1033 program, Nate?
That is where you can get some surplus equipment from the military that's been decommissioned. We actually got this from a sheriff's office that had it up north. But we'll talk about the equipment. So we do, regardless of we do have to go to people who are in distress and who are having, potentially a mental crisis, and they have firearms. I've been shot at. I've been to calls where I was on the SWAT team, and prior to having this equipment, we were putting ourselves in more risk as deputies and officers. And this may sound counterintuitive to the group, but when you have this armored vehicle, I know that there's nothing that is lawfully owned by citizens that can hurt our deputies or myself when they're inside of this vehicle. So it actually changes the use of force dynamic. So when I explain this is when you have somebody who is in a house and who may be hostile, has a firearm, who's fired their rifle or their handgun off, when the police get there because the neighbors are calling, we can't really leave at this point. We can't walk away because this person has indicated that they may be a risk to the community. And so where before we would have to hide around cars or behind a tree, and if the individual came out, we were put in this precarious situation of, is this where we're going to have a deadly use of force because I don't have space or cover from this individual as I would like. These vehicles have given us the opportunity to pull up very close and to be safe from individuals who are in crises and would use a firearm against others. And so that right there has changed the dynamic, and we've had a lot of successful outcomes from negotiators and even mental health workers who have been able to take advantage of that mobile piece of armor that they know they're safe in, and it doesn't force us to immediately have to respond to a deadly force scenario with deadly force. It gives us more time and safety. So, and Ty did allude that these vehicles are not just for intimidation or any of that nature. These are citizen rescue vehicles or officer rescue vehicles as well. So they're multi-purpose, and they really changed, I think, personally, the way we do things for the better, and actually have made things safer for the deputies, the officers, and for the public for many reasons. So we do use those. They don't go out every day. They're pretty limited in their use. I would say, between 5 and 10 times a year that they actually leave our bay. That means the garage, and go out. But it is usually on armed individuals or someone who has committed a violent crime against another person.
Well, this category of military equipment isn't perfectly well defined here, but
Sure.
probably includes in the current conversation tear gas, chemical gases, flashbangs, rubber bullets, those kinds of things. I wonder if there is a downside to them in that their appearance can escalate the level of tension and violence. I think it's fair to say that in larger cities, we've seen incidents in recent weeks where some of that gear was used on events that certainly look peaceful, and some of it rolls out and kind of escalates the tension right away. Would you be open to a conversation that really does go beyond this valley about looking harder and more discriminatingly at the use and the show of these kinds of tools?
I have been watching national media just as everyone else is, and some of the things that we've seen are not good. I'm not going to justify what we've all witnessed in some other parts of the country, but I can talk about what we try to do here. And here, I don't feel like law enforcement overuses or abuses those tools or equipment. Yes, we have flashbangs, used very limitedly. Yes, and usually as a diversionary device, not necessarily as a to cause harm to anyone. We do have less lethal projectiles. We have been able to avoid a deadly force scenario by using these tools. So it was a lower level of force. Had we not had those tools, though, there could have been, deadly force needed to be used. So I think with, if things are used appropriately and you have good training and you have good policies and you have good people who are using them and you have good leaders, and you work with your community, I don't think that these things are something that you take out of the picture as a wholesale item just to take them out. I think there are reasonable places for some of this equipment. Now, overuse can be problematic. I don't disagree. Or when you don't want, but things have changed. Think when I started as an officer, and a SWAT team member, it used to be where the SWAT team would get called on a lot of different things. Now we really think about the necessity to use a SWAT team in its traditional form. We still train, we still have a team, because when you need one, you don't want to not have one to go save lives or to deal with a situation that's dangerous. But the same token, we use that as almost a last resort, as when we've exhausted all other means, is then it appropriate for a SWAT team. And I think the country is shifting to that way, and maybe not in all the places as fast, but I'd like to say that in Southern Oregon and in Oregon in general, that we're pretty progressive with our policies and our practices and our training. And I think that we don't have an overuse, in my opinion, where we're having, every day our vehicles going out and we're, conducting SWAT team operations. It's pretty limited use.
Have they been used since you've been sheriff in a demonstration protest context?
No, I can't even think, other than just recently when we had some protests in Medford, which is Chief Claussen's jurisdiction. I can't think of the last time we had a large protest. Certainly is when I've been sheriff. I think I just can't remember an instance. So we have not deployed gases. I think before I got here, George Bush, when he was in town in Jacksonville, there were some demonstrations back then. I wasn't part of that. I've heard the stories of that, but since that time, I can't think of where we've had large scale demonstrations that we've had to use or chose to use any of those munitions or gas or anything like that.
Scott Claussen in Medford, what kind of military equipment do you have you used, and do you have thoughts on the larger picture on whether there's room to scale back?
Well, I would agree with the other comments and even in what you said, Jeff, that it can be an intimidation tactic, and I think we have certainly seen that in the bigger cities. Certainly not around here, but we do have a small carrier vehicle. We have not gotten any military surplus equipment. This one was a vehicle that we purchased specifically to be able to respond to incidents. And generally, I agree with the sheriff, I would say 99.9%, they're armed subjects. Sometimes they're holding people against their will. And I come at this from also a perspective of being a crisis negotiator for over 15 years and having over 20 successful outcomes where we really did need to use a vehicle that would provide protection for us. Because in a perfect world, you have phone capability and you can establish communication that way. But as we all know, you don't always get that perfect scenario. And you do have to use a vehicle that has a PA on it to try to get people to come out. So I, again, completely agree with the sheriff. These are fortunately extremely rare. We realistically haven't actually looked at the numbers, but I would say less than 5 times a year we actually deploy that vehicle. So they're rarely used.
Can give us a context, Scott. Can you tell us an incident where you used it?
Yeah, the one that immediately comes to mind is the homicide that we had on Table Rock Road. It was an estranged male-female. He ended up stabbing her to death, and that we ended up chasing that suspect out into Central Point, into a rural area where he holed up in a house, and there were some family members in the house, and So we had to respond with that. We couldn't establish any kind of phone contact with him, but we had to get up close and negotiate with him.
Okay.
And those, sometimes these go several hours. I've personally been on negotiations that have lasted all night and still have had a good outcome.
Okay. Chief Chris Allison in Central Point, would you like to add to this topic on military equipment?
Yeah, I can't add a lot to it. We do not have any of the 1033 items. In 1998, our department under a different administration, I believe, got an older carrier, but I believe it was not used by Central Point, but more of a regional type of vehicle, but it was never held at Central Point. So that's kind of where we're lying. I think we try to be extremely cognizant of how we appear as that military piece. My department, as Chief O'Mara was talking about, the outer vests, I have not gone to the outer vests at this point because I want to make sure that we look, I just want to really make sure that we have a different, a community-based look. That being said, though, we still do have ones that you can take off during the summer so that people can put on another, they can put on their polos just for comfort. But I'm probably going to lean more towards those outer vests just because of the same reason that Chief O'Mara mentioned. The back injuries is what gets brought up the most, and that's something that can alleviate it. But I'd like to see a good balance of both of those things to come into play.
Okay, I'm gonna run through the rest of this, the specifics on some of the BLM interests and demands, because we are stacking up a number of questions that I'd like to get to some of them from tonight's group. Chokeholds, and so could we go like not more than a minute each on your thoughts on chokeholds and techniques designed to restrict breathing or deny oxygen? Are they banned in your department? What can you say briefly, please, Chris?
So what I can say is that they're banned. They have been banned. They haven't trained at the academy for 15 years. So no, we do not use them.
Scott?
Yeah, we're in the same position. We don't train on them. They're banned. I'm completely in support of the recent House bill that bans them as well. I agree with that language and the way they wrote that bill. So,
Nate?
Yeah, ours policy, we don't have it in our policy as a technique to be used. The only instance where one might be able would be consistent with Oregon law now the new House bill, and that is an alternative to using deadly force. If that was an option, that would be okay per policy because of the way the policy is written. But outside of your alternative is to use deadly force, meaning a firearm, you can't use a chokehold.
I just want to jump in here. A week before last, we did have a special session, and a bill was proposed that was an outright complete ban on anything designed to restrict breathing. And it was amended, and what passed is exactly what you said. The exception is if it's, a sort of certified use of deadly force situation. The reasoning being is, do we really want a system of laws where you're completely banned from a chokehold, but not from shooting someone to death if need be, and if a chokehold might avoid that. So that was the compromise in Salem on that. Ty, chokeholds, denial of breath.
Same thing that everybody else has said.
Body cams, Ty, are they used by all officers all of the time, and are films kept and available to evaluate behavior?
Body cams are issued to every uniform member, to every member of the department. Oregon law states that if a police officer is equipped with a body camera and they're going to investigate somebody for a crime or a violation, they must turn the camera on unless there is a policy that states that they don't have to. When we were developing our body camera policy, I worked with MPD and JCSO, And we carved out that the exception would be if the need to protect someone's privacy is greater than the need to collect evidence, then the body camera does not have to be turned on. And an example of that is if you're going to talk to a sexual assault victim survivor in a hospital, that's not something that needs to be recorded, even though you are in fact collecting evidence of a
Well,
crime.
let me ask, and this is for all of you, if we get into some really large loopholes here, because what do we have in place that makes sure that an officer who's going to press the line of what's permitted for sure keeps his body cam on? What makes that pretty secure? Let me go to you, Nate.
Well, I would say, so obviously it would be difficult for us to follow every person around to ensure that they had a body camera on all the time. I can tell you that our policy is probably very mirror-like of Ty's policy in Ashland, meaning that if the victim does not wish to be recorded or you're recording sensitive information, that you could honor those wishes in certain circumstances. But, really it's, when we have a use of force, our supervisors review the body cam. So if someone was reporting use of force and then never having body cam to go along with that, that would be an indicator that something is going on, that this person is failing to initiate their body camera during the contacts. Or if we're getting complaints from the public, we immediately watch the body cam. If we say we get a complaint of rudeness or unfair treatment or whatever the case may be, we immediately go to the body cam to review said complaints. And so if you had somebody who repeatedly was, say, getting a complaint and then you never had body cam, you would certainly have an indication that you would probably need to dig deeper into this issue to find out if they were in fact not using it within policy.
Have you ever disciplined an officer around this?
For not turning on their body camera? No, I have
Yes.
not. I have not. Our officers actually appreciate the body camera and the body camera video. It provides a level of transparency for them when they do their investigations. It provides protection from them in their mind from, potentially erroneous complaints or confusion of facts. And so they actually like to use the body cameras. So it hasn't been a problem with our organization.
Scott.
Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah, go ahead, Ty.
I don't know what kind of conducted energy weapons the other departments are using, but for APD, we very deliberately went to Taser 7, which is the newest version of the Taser conducted energy weapon, for two reasons. One, we wanted to switch over to a yellow conducted energy weapon so that it could not, or we could minimize the chance that it would be mistaken for a gun, because that's the situation that tragically played out in Eagle Point a couple of years ago. And two, because the Taser 7 model communicates with the body cam, and if you activate the Taser, the conducted energy weapon, every body cam within 30 meters is automatically told to record. And so that's an additional step that I would be surprised if we were the only ones to have done it. But we are trying to do everything we can to make sure that even in a critical situation, when the officer is jumping out and doing something quickly, the body cams are still getting turned on as often as possible. But we're never going to get 100% of that because it's based on human conduct.
Scott, your policy, let's go to Chris then first. Chris, your policy, your comment on body cams, what makes you confident that your officers have them on when they should?
Yeah, so I also wanted to kind of touch on body cameras. So in the Rogue Valley and in Central Point, for Central Point, we've had them since 2008. So the body camera isn't new to us, and our officers they very much welcome to have that. But not only do we have that, we have the new generation of the Taser that also communicates with our body camera. Also, we have dash cameras in the vehicle. So the majority of the time, not only are you going to have one or two officers' body cameras that are going to be activated, you're also going to have the dash cam. And so you're going to be getting quite a few camera angles at it, which is very helpful. what I guess the question is, how do you know? And I think that it comes down to supervisors and supervision. And I think a lot of these topics come down to that. It's very important that you have supervisors who are looking this over, making sure that these things are occurring so that you don't come onto a scene and you have questions later on and there's no video footage of that. That is going to be concerning.
Have you disciplined an officer or been around discipline for not having a body camera on?
I have not. Generally, I've not had this scenario where we didn't have the body camera footage in a question situation.
Okay. Scott, your turn on body cams, please.
Yeah, so I'm not really going to add too much that hasn't already been said. Our officers really like using the body cams. We have implemented the program in 2016, and you know, I was a little concerned about the buy-in initially, and since that time, if a camera ever goes down, they immediately come and want a new one. They don't want to go out on the street without one. So I'm very happy about that. There's a lot of things like the less lethal that does trigger the camera. And there's also, when the lights come on a vehicle, that also triggers the camera. So we run both our fleet cameras and the body cam on the same system. So there's constantly video running, and the video is actually running the entire duration that they're wearing the camera.
Okay.
So
I'm going to crunch and skip a couple of the prepared questions because I do want to leave time for questions from tonight. But there was several questions on training. And let me ask if you could spend about a minute answering this. How long do your officers train before they're on the street? And especially, do they have training in de-escalation and in some rudimentary recognition of mental health diagnoses, especially dealing with people on the autism spectrum? So that's a lot to answer in a minute, but Scott, I'll start with you. Can you speak a little bit to the training piece?
yeah, so they immediately at the police academy, the recruits get training on crisis, different disabilities, and so it continues on throughout their training. We have a 16-month academy, and then we have a 4 to 5 month training period just within our own agency. When they come back, we continue to do training. We have made it mandatory to put all of our employees through a 40-hour crisis intervention training. And I think most Rogue Valley agencies are pretty consistent with that. But you see large metropolitan areas put a handful of teams together for crisis intervention. We decided to go above and beyond that. We wanted every one of our employees who were making contact with the public to be well aware of the different issues and the different crises that people would be experiencing. So that I saw that one of the questions was somebody on the spectrum. Absolutely, that's a part of it. People who are suicidal, people who are going through, you name it, any kind of crisis. So, and then we continue to do training, and we continue to work very closely with our mental health partners.
Okay. Chris, just a little bit on training. How long before they're on the streets, and the kind of emphasis there could be on de-escalation and recognizing people on the spectrum?
So our academy, again, same, we have one academy for the state of Oregon. It's going to be 16 weeks. And then they're going to go into a field training program for anywhere from 12 to 20 weeks with an officer. Most of that training is really going to be focused on skills and de-escalation and all of the components that are surrounded by that. I think years ago it used to be the academy was focused on criminal law, those types of things, but now the need is more into de-escalation and how to handle those situations for our officers.
Nathan and Ty, do you want to add anything on this point? Move along.
Just really quickly, I figured out just really roughly without doing fun, but it's about 1,500 hours of training when you consider the academy, the some of your in-service training, and then the FTEP program, and like CIT training, and then there's the continued education piece. So it's quite a bit of training when you break it down. Does it sound like maybe when you say 8 months of training, or 9 months of training, but when you look at 40 hours a week, it adds up pretty quick. So it's a pretty extensive training.
Do you expect the events of the last month to change training quite a bit in terms of more emphasis on de-escalation, conflict resolution, that kind of thing?
Yeah, honestly, I do. I can say that we have 2 de-escalation instructors in our organization, so that's incorporated into our training program prior to what's been going on nationally. So we've already been kind of doing this stuff, and it's been a part of our scenario-based training for quite a while. And so we've already been doing that, but I can see trends to even focus more on this as time goes on.
Let me toss one question that just came in on this point, any of the 4 of you. Do you see a future of policing without guns to every call?
That's hard to imagine, honestly. When you look at Southern Oregon, we have a relatively safe community overall, but almost every single call that we go to in the county, the people that we go to have guns. I mean, there's a lot of firearms. So I think, that would be something that I would probably not be a proponent of at this current time. And we still have officers who are killed for really just being officers. So there's really unprovoked attacks on police officers, and to send them out unarmed, representing this level of authority and whatnot, I think would be very misguided.
Scott, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I just want to make a really quick comment too, because I would agree with the sheriff that we do need that armed initial response. But I guess the other question is there room for someone else to come in and maybe as more of a social worker or a therapist? I think that's a conversation that we're all willing to have with our community and have been saying for years. Are we really the best profession to remain on scene for another 45 minutes to an hour trying to work through someone's issues? There may be an opportunity there for another model.
Well, you've taken us to a really central point in all this. And, I don't want us to use our remaining time to talk about different interpretations of defund police, but there's a lot of discussion about the viability of transferring resources from police departments to other kinds of response, mental health, social service. Some large metropolitan departments have started doing it. In a perfect world, I'd suppose you could say, well, let's keep our budget and then supplement it with a lot more in those other, helpful services. That's not likely to happen as a budget reality. So could any of you speak to the prospect of city and county governments transferring resources from your departments or your current functions to mental health, de-escalation, other kinds of social services?
I'd love to speak to that. A few years ago, Jackson County Mental Health got a grant to embed a crisis intervention worker with APD. Jackson County got a similar embedded worker, as did Medford. I have no idea how MPD in Jackson County experienced the workload for their intervention worker. It was clear early on that APD, the city of Ashland, was not going to offer 40 hours a week worth of crisis intervention and outreach for our mental health workers. She did a great job. She worked through options for helping residents of Ashland, which is kind of the go-to agency for our unhoused community. She worked through the Ashland Culture Peace Commission, which is very engaged with at-risk members of the community. And even from Ashland Talent Phoenix, she still couldn't fill up a 40-hour work week. So to me, that's clear evidence. And I will say all day, every day, that we need more crisis intervention. We need more mental health workers. We need more to bring more of a social worker angle to address these problems. I feel strongly that a city the size of Ashland or Central Point and maybe even Medford cannot stand up a 24/7 model, having people on duty at all times to respond to this stuff, because from Ashland's point of view, it simply wasn't sustainable. So I'll agree all day long that we need those services, but it can't be left up, speaking for my community, can't be left to the city of Ashland to stand up a 24/7 crisis intervention model when we know that there was not 40 hours worth of work for the intervention worker to do. So I feel very strongly that it has to be a regional model that all of the municipalities participate in. But
Okay.
nobody on the panel is going to say that we don't need more mental health and we don't need more substance abuse treatment, and we don't need more outreach to the unhoused, where everybody feels the same way.
Well, I think the practical question that's facing the whole country is, are we ready to take resources from the current paradigm of armed law enforcement to put into those other services? Can we have a good quality public safety system with that kind of a shift? Would any of the three of you want to comment on that?
So Jeff, this is Chris Allison. Well, here's one of the, this is to me a very interesting topic, because I definitely feel that there are calls that police, it isn't necessary that we're always responding to. I've seen that throughout my career. And I think there has been scenarios where I've been working or been an administrator where there was a potential that we did escalate the situation. So I'm very excited that this conversation will come. This is where I see the need, and to have the discussions to build the infrastructure around having services in the community, because that's where I have always felt that we lack in. And I'm sure that that's just not the Rogue Valley, that's going to be Oregon and probably the nation, but to have the infrastructure so officers aren't having to go to those calls, I think that that's important.
Okay. With our remaining time, I do want to get into some of the questions people have asked tonight. There's a little bit of frustration, a little bit of feeling that we've been a little too polite tonight. One in particular from earlier in our conversation, someone who identified him or herself as a person of color said, after hearing, I think, a round where people said they didn't really see racism in law enforcement in the Rogue Valley, how are you holding each other accountable now? No racism among all of you? Anybody like to take that? I think there is skepticism for the same reason that we understand that racism, prevalent racism, isn't all that overt, that it's embedded. And I wonder, do you have hard conversations among yourself about these issues? About, I don't think I'm very good at recognizing my racism, and you've got a special responsibility to the community. Do you have those hard conversations and doubts about whether you're recognizing the racism in your departments?
I can go first, I guess. So realizing that I would probably not be I don't know how to say this correctly, maybe the best representative to ask, because obviously if I can't see it, like I said that, I don't see it. So I asked one of our Black officers tonight, or one of our deputies for the panel, I said, hey, I need you to be 100% honest with me. Do you see things from your perspective, as a member of the community, person of color, that are, in your opinion, systemically racist with police? Meaning, do you see police anywhere? Have you experienced in our current systems racism or witnessed it? And he says, you know what, I haven't. So I took from a Black deputy's perspective. Like, I just didn't take my own. I asked him and I said, just be 100% honest. Are we doing things here in our county that you believe, as a person of color, that are systemically racist from a law enforcement perspective? And he quantified and said, look, there are racist people. But as far as law enforcement deputies working the street, our DAs, our judges, he says, we try to treat everybody with equity and fairly, regardless of skin color or anything else. So those are his words, not mine. We have people of color who work
We
at
would
our
like to
office.
hear your words, though. Please don't scapegoat a Black person to justify whatever you're about to say. I can't, like, I just need to hear your words.
I already
Please
said
don't use another Black person.
I already said that I have
But you
not
don't, we didn't
witnessed
need
it.
that example. I'm so sorry. We just need your words.
And I've already said that I have not seen or do not see racism present in policing in Jackson County.
And that's the problem.
Anybody else, please, that want to drill any deeper as you know, I think the last couple months has been a wake-up call from just about anybody paying attention. So what are you thinking about that you haven't shared about drilling deeper on this?
So as I said, sorry, Chris, I worked in Detroit for 13 years, and I worked for several agencies in the middle of Cornfield, Michigan for 5 years before that. And I will freely admit that I've seen overt racism in policing in the United States. As I said before, our police departments are like our educational institutions or medical institutions. They are reflections of the national community. Camilla, thank you very much. I can honestly say that I have not seen manifested racism that I can squarely say is racist at the Ashland Police Department. And at the risk of raising the ire of some in the audience, my third in command is a person of color that's deeply involved in these conversations as well. And he and I talk about this stuff a lot. And we talk about the systemic racism in the country and the systemic racism that comes through all of its institutions, very appropriately right now for this conversation, the law enforcement community. And I can't put my finger on it. And if I could put my finger on it and say that officer is behaving in a way that is clearly racist, then that would be a huge issue. And that officer hopefully wouldn't be working for APD very long. So I fully recognize that it's there in the country. I've seen it act out in uniform before with my own eyes. I just don't see it in the Ashland Police Department.
Scott or Chris, anything to add?
To add on to that conversation is that I think throughout the weeks, the last few months, it's really, when you talked about holding each other accountable, it is really having those hard conversations with our supervisors, with our officers, to talk about these issues. And I think that that's really important because clearly there are issues within law enforcement throughout our country. I do have to mirror, I haven't seen overt racism. That doesn't mean that there isn't biases or other items that go on that I think are very important to ferret out and understand them and understand what they are for each individual, because they are very true. Those are the conversations, those hard conversations that I think that we have to have.
Well, speaking of which, that's a good segue, because I've been asked here tonight, if the four of you, which of you would be willing to return for a forum and a conversation with a different composition, including people of color and people who probably have questions that I'm not thinking of as tonight's moderator. Would you raise your hand as a panelist if you'd be willing to come back for that conversation? Well, I see 4 hands for organizers going forward. We've got just a little bit more time. I wanted to ask about, we dealt in Salem 2 weeks ago with an issue that we didn't resolve about reducing as close to zero as we can the rehiring of officers who've demonstrated they're not fit to be officers around violence or around racism. And there are these just shocking stories. The cop in Minneapolis apparently just had a long record. You know, it's partly a database issue. Is that an area where we need more cooperation, more resources so that we're not rehiring people who shouldn't be police officers? And you feel good about whatever system you use, that you're not going to rehire somebody who shouldn't be in law enforcement.
So Jeff, I'll talk just a little bit about that. I'm familiar with that legislation that went through, and I think it's a start. That's something that the chiefs have asked for some time, looking at a conversation. So I was really happy to see that pass in the special session.
Yeah, well, we hope that's going to make a difference. I'll just add another comment that just came in. I think kind of thanking you for your willingness to participate in another forum. It says people of color are asking how they can help you see the actual racism they're experiencing. There needs to be other forums. So that's something to look forward to. We're just about ready to wrap up. There's questions, there's real interest in the Cahoots program that I think you all know about, and they came down to the Valley. I think, Nate, when you were holding a series of conversations about the proposed jail, they came down, and there's a lot of interest in that going forward. Let's do a closing round of comments, and here's what I want. You know, you're the ones talking tonight, and everybody else is listening. So, and one hopes in coming forums, you're going to be able to listen to what people at Cutler and others think you may not be getting. If there's, let me just ask you really, for any closing comments you want for a couple of minutes, but especially, I guess my organizing question would be, what do you think the general public, and can you think of one or two things that you'd really like people, the general public, to understand about policing as it exists today, where you think there's a shortage of understanding, something important that people might not get? I don't want to put it in any kind of patronizing frame, but something you hear again and again that's a misapprehension that you wish there were broader understanding of. You know, in a future forum, others are going to be asked that question. What do they want you to get that they think you don't? But if you could clarify something generally for the general public about your job, about the challenges you face, what would it be? And I think I saw your hand, Ty.
Not to state the obvious, police officers are people. They are members of the community. They are members of the community that do a very difficult job, as well as they are equipped to do it, as well as they can do it. And they make mistakes, and they are imperfect. And our system is imperfect. And there is nobody that is part of this conversation. There is nobody in the I'm just going to say in the world that has the answer. These are very complicated issues that we're trying to navigate. I know that my department, and I'm confident that the other chiefs and the sheriff share this view, want to be partners in furthering that conversation, even if we just move it a couple inches down the road, because there is no slam dunk on this. This is an issue that is not going to be solved in any of our lifetimes. It's an issue that's going to take, if it ever gets unraveled, it's going to take a really, really long time for it to get unraveled. So the best we can hope for, you know, we can aim for or reach for the stars. The best we're actually going to get is moving this down the path a little bit. So again, to circle back to what I said, it is an imperfect system, so help us fix it. Everybody that puts on a uniform is an imperfect individual that's not going to get stuff correct 100% of the time. So continue to work with us in a constructive manner to help alleviate that condition so it gets better the next time around. And thanks for having me.
Nathan Sickler of Jackson County, what would your closing thoughts be?
You know, I think I would echo a lot of what Ty said. I am very interested in the sheriff as building relationships with our community. And there are things that I obviously, you know, I don't know everything. My door is open in my office to anybody in the community to come and have a conversation, to bring any grievance or issues that they have with anything that we do as a department, and I am willing to have those conversations and try to make things better for everybody. So I do echo that, you know, police officers are members of this community. They enjoy working and living in Jackson County. They're raising their families here just like everyone else. And I think that that goes a long way. There's a lot of good things that law enforcement does every day, and there are some bad things that happen. I think we've seen some of those recently. I would just ask that, you know, we work together to address those issues, and remember that the officers are members of this community as well.
Thank you. Chris Allison, a Central Point, closing thoughts?
Yeah, very good question, Jeff. It's one of those items that I have struggled with for the last couple of weeks. I am always surprised when people are surprised that we want to come to the table. I think it's important that we come to the table. I also think as a law enforcement leader, not only in the Valley, but in the state, policing is going to change. It will change. And I think our communities are going to really model what that looks like. And we do want it to be there. There are things that we see that definitely could be remedied. And we want to have a very good insight in that. And I think that surprises some individuals when they hear that. And I guess those would be something that I would say is, as a community, please know that we are knowing that things are going to change, and we definitely are accepting that some things should be changed. That's something I would say.
Thank you. And Scott Claussen of Medford.
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement with the other panelists. I think this is really an incredible opportunity, and I've been saying this from the beginning this year, just within the last few months. It's an incredible opportunity for us to just sit back and listen. And I really appreciate that you have invited us here. I know, as you said earlier, it was a little bit controversial, but again, we want to listen. We want to grow as a community. And I agree with Chief Allison. We are changing, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to work with you and do that. And Jeff, earlier you didn't see my hand, but before we moved on, I just wanted to also mention that I'm very open to having folks come in and talk to my officers. We do an annual implicit bias training. We do procedural justice training annually, along with our ethics training. And that is a perfect opportunity for us to hear from our community.
And do the four of you have bandwidth to follow up with people if they have emailed questions or questions we didn't get to tonight? There was data I asked you that you didn't have top of your head. Can we invite people to email you with specific questions if they want answers? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, I just want to say thanks. I know this is in any format, this is a difficult conversation. This particular format was not designed for any kind of a debate or disagreement, really. It was more of an informational format. You can tell by the chat that there's, emotion and unresolved stuff out there. Guess what? We didn't resolve everything tonight. And I really want to thank the four of you for your time tonight and your approach to all this and your service. And with that, I'm gonna toss it back to Terry to close.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I learned a ton. I hope you did too. As Jeff said, this is really more of an informative session, a place where we can understand how policing is done here and how we go forward. I think all of us are coming away with this with a lot of ideas on how things could be different. And we hope to have that conversation going forward in the next forums. I've seen a million ideas in the chat box there of how we can go forward, and Indivisible is certainly open to hosting whatever comes next in a way that everybody agrees to. So anyway, keep the conversation coming at us, and we're happy to do this for you.
Also, I just want to say I had a lady on here private chatting me in the private chat that I had to ask to please stop chatting with me, telling me she didn't want to hear my comments. And she chatted to me more than once. I like to share her name with whoever I need to share with in the background, because I had to ask her to please leave me alone.
Okay, you can send it to one of us at Indivisible. I'll post my email at the bottom. Anybody can, if you have any questions about Indivisible or thoughts on this process, we really tried to make it in open in a way that you could hear what these people had to say without the debate process, to be honest with you. And now if this, the next step is making a debate out of this, then
I don't think it was a debate. Or you can always disable a chat when you just want to have a forum. You can just disable the chat, but otherwise, everybody's just having their own responses, and we've been doing it throughout. But you can always disable the chat function if that's not how you want it to go as well.
Right. Okay. Well, we're open to feedback on this for sure, and we're delighted that everyone came tonight, and we hope that everyone learned something in the process. I will put contact information down below in the chat. This is recorded. Everyone can certainly go back and see it and refer it to friends so that they can watch this. We will copy out everything that's in the chat, and we will try to forward it to the panelists. We instructed them earlier that perhaps they shouldn't be watching the chat, because if you're trying to have a discussion, we really wanted them to focus on what they were saying and what was going on, and not be distracted by what was going on over there. So we'll do everything we can to make sure that they get that information as well.
Look
Okay.
forward to continuing the conversation.
What's that?
I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks to Indivisible for making it happen.
We were delighted to do this, and we look forward to the next round. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.